So I'd say that JLI is the evidence and research network on religion and development that's not replicated anywhere else. We have a incredibly large member network that has been able to bridge between academia and practice in the way that, again, no other organization can and has in religion and development.
This is a podcast called Walk, Talk, Listen. An attempt to connect people and make this world a bit better by sharing opinions and experiences based on the belief that everyone's perspective is true, albeit partial. My name is Maurice Bloem, and I would like to welcome you to yet another episode of Walk, Talk, Listen. Okay, good day everybody. This is another episode of the special series about JLI, and I'm really delighted with today's guest. And her name is Olivia, and she will introduce herself. Olivia, please go ahead.
Thank you very much, Maurice. Yes, my name is Olivia Wilkinson. I'm Director of Research at the Joint Learning Initiative on Faith and Local Communities. I've been Director of Research since the very beginning of 2018. So this is, my sixth year. The existence of JLI is very much, in line with everything that I've been working on in my career up until this point. So I grew up in the UK. I now live in the US, however. And early on in my studies, I was interested in religious studies. That's what I did my undergraduate in theology and religious studies. I quickly identified that I wasn't a theologian, but I was interested in the religious studies side of things. And I didn't really know where to go with that though. And so I thought about when I was thinking about a career, I did some voluntary work for like a gap year, and then I did a master's in humanitarian action. And so I kind of left the religion stuff behind for a while. I thought I was going to go into humanitarian world more completely. But when I was doing that master's degree, I had this niggling sense in the back of my mind that religion was this huge gap. Like a lot of the social aspects to humanitarian response that were being discussed during this master's degree seemed like they should be considering religion, and that wasn't being considered. And so this was like 2010, and there had been a bit of work in religion and development by then. It wasn't an empty field. But in terms of religion and humanitarianism, that disaster response side of things, it was much more sparse. There was very, very little. But there were a few people working on it. And around that time, there's some publications in like 2011, 2012, where there starts to be a bit of momentum. And so then going into, I started working as a researcher in on humanitarian action. Again, it wasn't as focused on religion, but I started to put together a PhD proposal that brought all these areas of study together. So religious studies and the humanitarian and development side of things. And that came together in a PhD at Trinity College Dublin that very specifically was on religion and humanitarian response. So what I looked at was the response to Typhoon Haiyan in the Philippines. The typhoon happened November 2013. And my question was, how does a secular viewpoint affect the religious engagement of international NGOs in their humanitarian response in contexts that are highly religious, with the hypothesis that there would be a gap and potentially issues of misunderstanding, misalignment, problems created by these different secular and religious worldviews, and how they met in this moment of crisis in a humanitarian response, and how unusual it is really to have an environment in which you have, these organizations from completely different cultures all of a sudden coming into a place and creating their own kind of mini cultures around what's the standards of the humanitarian system, what's acceptable, what's not, how things should operate. And of course, this was a PhD. I spent time in the Philippines, and did a lot of interviews, focus groups. It was a really transformative experience in my life. And the results of PhD are something that still inform all of my thinking. So now I guess I finished the PhD like 8 years ago. But I still come back to some of the ideas within it that essentially that there was this misperception amongst the secular NGOs that they somewhat knew better a lot of the time, but that there was this dominance that they could create what I came to call like a secular public sphere. So that's kind of the academic terminology, just to say they created a space, like a little environment amongst all the NGOs working together that was predominantly secular. And although they weren't, anti-religion, they weren't, they rarely talked about religion at all, but that meant that there was a misunderstanding of people's lives, like their lived religion, the day-to-day existence of people living in that place was deeply intertwined with their religious beliefs and religious practices. More than anything, it's religious practice that demonstrates itself in people's day-to-day life. And there was just a kind of ignorance amongst many of the NGOs. But of course, it didn't mean that religious engagement wasn't happening all the time. And I think that's something that I do come back to again and again. Like, religious engagement sometimes has been, people have said that there's not been enough religious engagement. We need more religious engagement. And I don't think it's a quantity issue. I think religious engagement happens all the time. We don't need more. We don't need more or less in either direction. It just is. What's the issue is a quality issue. And so there were so many stories that, I learned about from these NGOs of examples in which they, right from the very small example. So, I'd start an interview and someone would say, well, we don't think about religion. We are a secular NGO. We are impartial and neutral, and therefore we can't engage with religion. Which is a lot of assumptions about what religion is and is not. If you say we can't engage because we are impartial and neutral, of course, religion can be impartial and it can be partial. It's just got a range of different expressions and experiences. But anyway, so they would say something like, oh, we can't engage with it. I don't have anything to tell you in this interview. And then within 2 seconds, they would say, oh, yes, but there was that one time that I used petty cash to fund a ceremony when we opened a new wing of this building. Or there was another, someone said, oh, yeah, we always sacrifice a chicken when we open when we have new shelters available to people, for example. And I said, well, so that is a very concrete example of how you are doing religion, even if you have thought that you are not, because it is about this ritual and practice. But it led to there are bigger examples. So those are small things, the difference, I don't know how much of a difference it makes or doesn't make, but sometimes it could be catastrophic to a response. So there was one example where an NGO had not understood, not done any consultation or any kind of lessons learned to understand that in a particular part of an island, there had been a big move of people from Catholic population to evangelical churches, and that was causing a lot of tension in the island. And I mean, we see this in like demographics about religion, like move to evangelical churches, and that there's not necessarily people moving away from religion, it's moving to other forms of religion. And they'd done a shelter project, and basically the long and short of it is that they'd essentially created shelters for the Catholic population, and all the people in the evangelical churches were shut out of that opportunity because of divides within the community and how they'd targeted beneficiaries and who they'd spoken to. And so they created like a denominational divide, and they had no idea about it. And so that's where you are doing accidental social engineering through your ignorance of the context and the religious dynamics in that context. So obviously it's hugely important to take that into account. I'm being quite long-winded to this response, but you could get me started on this topic and I could speak for an hour without any questions. So
no, I find it interesting, Olivia, because I'm an anthropologist, so I'm fascinated always by these stories and the fact that, the identification of subcultures and a lot of people are very often not aware. So that's really insightful. So yeah, go ahead. I do have a question in terms of because you were referring to the NGOs that were working there, so the international NGOs, the international non-governmental organizations. But many of them are also faith-based, right? So did you come across them as well, and how did they relate into what you were observing?
Mm-hmm. Right. So there's a range of types of FBOs, essentially.
Or faith-based organizations. Sorry.
Faith-based. Sorry, there's so much jargon. Yeah. FBOs is faith-based organization. And they are so you have the range from the faith-based organizations that are essentially acting in a secular manner. They look and talk and exist as any non-faith-based organization would. And of course, we'd make the argument that they have navigated themselves, sometimes forced into that position. So in order to be a legitimate, recognized humanitarian actor, overall, the humanitarian system has these kind of secular standards, and you must meet them. And if you don't, you are outside the humanitarian system and not recognized as legitimate in the same way. So if you want to be part of that system, you change or you become or you even start your existence as a certain type of faith-based organization that knows how to walk the secular talk, even if keeping some elements of your mission and values, etc., connected to faith. And I think that's a lot of the big faith-based organizations nowadays. Of course, then there are the faith-based organizations that are much more connected to the daily practice of religion, as I've said again. And the reasons why humanitarian system wouldn't see them as legitimate is because you start getting into the realms where they might be doing more religious work than humanitarian work, and there are boundaries placed around that due to issues such as proselytization. So if part of your humanitarian assistance is very much based on the condition that people receive the assistance by taking part in religious services or particularly converting to a religion, then that is an absolute red flag, and is the ultimate barrier that loses legitimacy for an organization's place in the humanitarian system. because then absolutely the assistance is partial. You are requiring an exchange of belief of something so deep and important and essential to someone's life for humanitarian assistance, be that food, shelter, water, etc. And I think that's a correct red flag. Like I don't argue against that. But the thing is, if we have two ends of the spectrum, and that's the furthest end of the spectrum, and the other end of the spectrum is basically, maybe faith-based in name only and otherwise no differentiation. There's a lot in between, therefore. And I think that what happens with faith-based organizations is they just get put in a box at one end of the spectrum or the other. And that causes many issues about identity and how to navigate your faith-based identity as a faith-based organization. And that could be a whole other topic. I'm actually not going to get into that because I could spiral into like an hour of conversation on that point as well.
Questions around this. One is just for the listeners, because we kind of tickled, their how do you say, curiosity. So your PhD has been published. Can people read that, or has it been divided into blogs or articles?
Both, all, everything.
Okay.
So there is a book. It's called Secular Religious Dynamics in Humanitarian Response, published by Routledge. And there are also several journal articles that you can find under my name, and several blog posts. So if you want to learn specifically about the research from the Philippines, that is in the book and some of those journal articles. But as I said, like any of my publications in the past 10 years are all broadly talking about this topic of, religious engagement in humanitarian and development work, and sometimes in different countries, not just the Philippines. Basically just look me up. There's a lot of publications that you can read, probably too much.
No, so we will ensure that we enable the listeners to, when they check out the podcast notes, that they can find at least the book through the link. So we'll make sure of that. Then what I would like to do is bring us to JLI, because it's clear, the work that you did in the Philippines, the book that you wrote, is very much in line with what JLI is about. So I have then two questions, where we go towards the JLI and your experience there. The first one is, do you still remember the first time that you heard about JLI? And tell us something about that. And then we go to, what do you like about the work of JLI?
So I found out about JLI when I was in the first year of my PhD, or maybe even very, very early on, when I was just searching for information, publications, resources. So maybe the first way that many people find JLI, they are interested in this topic and they want to know more about the research in this area. So I was in, and then I got in contact with JLI. So at that time, Jean Duff, who is the founder of JLI, co-founder with others, and was, the first staff member, the first person working on it, the first coordinator, bringing all of the initial existence of JLI together. She was particularly, interested in my research, and I'm so grateful to Jean. She's become a mentor in my life, and was very, very supportive of everything that I was working on. And she put me in touch with the learning hubs. At those times, there were some of the first learning hubs. So there was the Resilience Learning Hub, which was particularly interested in like resilience in humanitarian contexts. And Alistair Ager and Elena Fidian Kashmir were the co-chairs, and they were very helpful as well as many of the hub members who were put me in touch with many of my contacts in the Philippines. You know, people that I'm still in contact with now came from me being part of the Resilience Hub and talking to other Resilience Hub members in probably 2013, 2014, around that time. So I have been I've had every type of involvement with JLI, as a hub member, you know, as just someone looking at the website, to a hub member, to a consultant. So the next thing that happened was I became a consultant and started working on some papers, some evidence briefs for JLI when we were building up to the World Humanitarian Summit in 2015 and then into 2016. And then in 2018 became the first director of research, or the only director of research, and you know, I think the third staff member by that point. So there was Jean and Stacey and myself, and it was just us for a while, for several years too. So it's really amazing to see how many people now are working with JLI, and how JLI has grown. Yeah, it's exciting.
What do you like about the work of JLI?
Well, I mean, obviously, the topic is completely aligned with my interests. So there was pretty much a perfect match. Jean spotted that from the beginning. You know, she just had an eye for finding the right people. And, you know, I think she identified me as the right person to put in the right place, basically. And she could do that. So, you know, that was all thanks to her. You know, over the years, what I've liked is this ability to bridge worlds between that research and practice. And very much now, I don't really feel like I have a foot in. I'm not dedicated to one side or the other. You know, I'm not an academic anymore, but I'm not a practitioner either. And we really do a good job in JLI, I think, of being able to speak to both. Like, we work with practitioners all the time, and we're able to bring research and evidence to them and make it useful and meaningful in the ways that we advise religious engagement should happen in development projects. So I appreciate that. And I appreciate that basically we've been able to do a lot of research in a way that, you know, I think if I was an academic, I probably wouldn't have done as much research. Like, we just have had many interesting and different opportunities that don't come along unless you identify yourself in such a niche way, that, as we have done at JLI, as the research and evidence people on religion and development. But also, the final thing is just, I do love working at JLI because we have a very good organizational culture, which is different than everything that I've said before, but it is part of what makes it, you know, even when we're working in a small organization and we're kind of got all the trials that come with that, we have created a very empathetic and kind environment where people listen to each other, and everything's quite horizontal in a way that I haven't experienced much in other places. So I think that's what's kept me here over these years, in particular, when there are tough moments, etc. It's that I've been listened to, we listen to each other, and we're kind to each other.
Yeah. And, you know, I'm not that long with JLI, but I can attest to that. I mean, it's really a great group of people to work with. And you're absolutely right. And to go back to your comment in terms, you know, where you said, I'm not an academic and I'm not a practitioner. Well, I think in this world, it is really important to have what I call linchpins, you know, translators, because, you know, so many worlds are different. Well, you need more connection between what is happening. And that is more important than ever, I think, because there's so much misunderstandings because people don't understand each other's world, each other's context, each other's language. So I think JLI, and specifically the work that you do, is really important. And so thank you for that. Olivia, you know, what I hope that these special episodes of the Walk, Talk, Listen podcast will do is also, tell a wider, range of people about the great work that, JLI has been doing, and including, you're part of that. Yeah, then people always say, what is your elevator speech? How can you quickly, because people don't have a lot of time and patience. So what will you say if you have a minute, or you go from the 22nd floor to the ground floor and you have to explain about JLI? What will you say?
Who am I pitching to?
A person that would be interested to that potentially would be interested in collaborating because they work in this space of humanitarian assistance, but also has resources that will help to expand the work of JLI.
Mm-hmm. So I'd say that JLI is the evidence and research network on religion and development that's not replicated anywhere else. We have a incredibly large member network that has been able to bridge between academia and practice in the way that, again, no other organization can and has in religion and development field. And we have this niche expertise about how to do better religious engagement in humanitarian and development work. And if that is something that you have a question about, then we can bring the evidence-based advice to answer all your questions.
I would like to ask you, because you've mentioned this a lot, and it's also referred to in previous episodes, is the hubs, the different hubs. So, yeah, if you have it to explain this, what it means and what the hub is doing. But what is a hub in terms of working on gender-based violence or on any other topic that you mentioned?
So we are the Joint Learning Initiative.
Mm-hmm.
So joint learning is about learning exchange. And the way that that is implemented is through learning hubs. They are a sort of community of practice, and they are targeted at this mix of researchers, practitioners, and policymakers who are interested in religion and any given topic. So we have, yes, religion and gender-based violence, religion and refugees and forced migration, religion and anti-trafficking. You can see on our website a whole list. The Learning Hub structure was not something we invented. There was another joint learning initiative before JLI existed, and it was on children and HIV/AIDS. And so we borrowed that model, and we've since, adapted it in many ways to make it our own. But the real value to that model that makes us, different than, say, a research consultancy, means that we've created this large network over the years of people around the world in many different countries and on many different topics who have identified themselves as interested in and knowledgeable about that particular subject area. And that's that's unusual because of the fact that some of these subject areas are not topics that get talked about very often, or there aren't other places where people have that ability to engage on, well, what is the latest research around religion and gender-based violence programming, for example, and how do I put that into practice in my job as a development practitioner, for example. And the learning hubs, evolve over time, and we've had many different iterations of them, and sometimes they retire after a few years, and sometimes they get going again. And so we follow where the energy is. We're not forcing their existence upon the world. And we're led by where there's passion from certain people that comes forward, and then we can create a platform through the Learning Hub for people's passions to collaborate with other people who have similar passions. And I think that they've been very fruitful over the years. And I think as I said, it's what sets JLI apart.
Thank you. That's really helpful. So, when I was listening to you, then the hubs exist of different types of folks. So international NGOs and their staff are also part of those hubs in certain occasions, right? How is that going? And especially, I'm asking this question going back to your PhD study, where, when international NGOs are in the field, they bring in this new type of, vocabulary, and things are, how does that go then? How do they, those different people in the hubs, how do they talk with each other, and what is the role then of JLI in facilitating that?
Yeah, right. So we have to play a facilitator role. That is absolutely the role for JLI. And there are many different agendas potentially at play, right? People joining a group can want different outcomes from it. I mean, one of the things that we've been particularly interested in over the years is localization and the collaboration with more local faith actors, lifting up the value and role of local faith actors, and also helping local faith actors improve their research and evidence and knowledge work too, which is oftentimes just non-existent and up till this point. So we have noted, broadly speaking, that there are many local faith actors that remain unconnected to humanitarian and development systems and funding and partners, and that there are many reasons for that, that they are just unaware, but there's a lot that happens in parallel, which leads to replication, duplication, wasted resources, and that there are also biases amongst the INGOs, the international NGOs, against local faith actors. They're viewed as lacking capacity, which is a problem with any local organization. This view that they do not have the capacity to receive grants from Western donors. But there are also particular biases related to religion. And those are, as I was saying before, like these biases that local faith actors will not be neutral. They will not be impartial. Instead, they will be partial. They will only give assistance to their co-religionists, i.e., the people in their congregations with them, for example. And of course, that's not the case most commonly. It can sometimes be the case, though, as well. So you have to know and understand the context and do your analysis of who are the local faith actors, how do they work, who are they working with, how have they worked historically. And you also have to do the work to help those local faith actors to say, okay, this organization looks like a really good organization, but they probably do need some capacity building in terms of their finances in order for them to be able to receive a grant with all the compliance requirements that come with big grants nowadays, or even smallish grants. So there are these divides, like very, very stark divides between the local and the international. I mean, a lot of the international faith-based organizations have been working with local faith-based organizations for many years. So, they're actually not the worst offenders. It's others that are having more problems working with local actors. But at the same time, we've had to make a conscious effort. And I think this is what Sadia talked about in her interview a bit more, to, change the makeup of our learning hubs, move away from northern Western dominance of people involved, and more consciously engage local faith actors to bridge some of these divides and be more inclusive.
I would like to jump to, what is, I think rightly so, considered to be the flagship of JLI, and that is the state of the evidence, the publication around it. You were very much involved. You were one of the key authors there. Yeah, can you tell a bit about why is that important, that publication? And how is it also then related to the hubs?
Right. So the State of the Evidence report was an idea I had probably in about 2019 in its very, very original format. We didn't publish the first State of the Evidence until 2022. So you see that it took some time to develop. And it was an idea that I had, in conversation with Jean and Stacey at the, in those earlier days of JLI. We had been producing scoping studies through the Learning Hubs. So the Learning Hubs produced for each of their topic areas a long report that was a really in-depth literature review with some interviews, case studies, etc., to demonstrate the scope of our knowledge, of our evidence in that particular topic so far. But as director of research, I often found myself summarizing these scoping studies and creating my own mini reading list for people. People would come to me and say, we are wanting to maybe start a new project in, well, let's take GBV again, because we've been using that as the example so far.
Gender-based violence, yeah?
Yeah, gender-based violence. We want to start a project in religion and gender-based violence. Can you send me all the latest research in this area? And then I'd spend half a day putting it together. And it was happening over and over again. And it was great in many ways because it demonstrated that JLI was recognized as like a go-to resource person or group that knew the latest evidence in these fields and who to connect other people to. But it was also becoming increasingly frustrating and also laborious. Like we were putting in a lot of work. And it became clear we needed just like our flagship report that summarized, that did that work. And so could be the go-to when anyone comes to us and says, what is the latest evidence in religion and gender-based violence, or religion and climate, or religion and, any other area that's important to development practitioners? We could say, oh, we have it already summarized for you in this report. And even just that very basic thing of what is religion and development, like that was what we needed. We needed a quick go-to place where we could say, read this piece and that will answer all these questions for you. And then come to us after you've read that piece and we can go into more depth, basically. So the idea was to have these chapters that would be 2,000 words max. We didn't want long, a journal article is 6,000 to 10,000 words. We didn't want them to be that long. We wanted them to be short and more easily accessible to people. While also it had to be 2,000 words because it needed to have enough content to really demonstrate the depth and interesting points of the research. It couldn't just be a few bullet points. It couldn't be a one page on some of these topics. So that was where we kind of found a middle ground. And so we've created this report. And the first report in 2022 was very much linked to Learning Hub topics as well. So we collaborated with researchers that have been involved in the Learning Hubs over the various years and invited them to write chapters. And the chapters are, they're not aligned with every single Learning Hub, but the broad basis of the chapters covers, every topic that we've covered in the Learning Hubs before. So we created the report as a demonstration of the wealth, the depth and breadth of evidence in religion and development. We linked it, we gained inspiration from the scoping studies from previous learning hubs. We linked it in terms of the content of the chapters to the learning hubs and invited researchers from the learning hubs to contribute. And we also did other pieces connected to it. Each chapter is available as a standalone. There are videos connected to the different chapters. There are blog posts connected to the different chapters. We still have some to publish. It's not completed. But again, we wanted to make sure that we had other communication formats, basically, other ways that people could understand the content and quickly engage with the content, because I really get that even if it is just 2,000 words in a chapter, that's still sometimes a bit of a feels like a barrier to people's accessibility. So rather than saying, oh, we're just going to make a report that's just a lot of blog post length excerts, I think we need all these different formats. So you do need the slightly longer piece, the 2,000 word chapter that has all the different references, it's citing the different material, demonstrating this is where the research comes from, etc. But then you have a blog post as well to summarize it even more. You have a video for someone who likes more visual or hearing the information. That's easier for them to take that information in. So it's been, I think, more than anything, actually, what we've learned from it is about the kind of research communications and how we do that side of things. And that's been an interesting process for us and something that we need to take forward. And of course, the next state of the evidence, it's meant to be every 2 years. So we're hoping to publish something, by the end of this year or early next year, I guess.
I've asked this question also to your colleague Sadia, but if I ask you, where do you think the state of the evidence report glows? So what are what are you proud of that you were able to achieve, as a team, and where is there, a possibility to grow, to improve it? What would you mention?
Well, I mean, I am proud of how it's been used. It's doing exactly what we intended it to do. There's a conference being planned at the moment where they have taken the state of the evidence report as the basis of how they've gone about planning the content and the different panels for the conference, because it was the go-to place that already summarized all the material they needed. There have been many reports from different people of them saying, of sharing the state of the evidence report with colleagues when they're trying to introduce religion and development as an important issue to other colleagues that have no idea about it. Those are really validating stories and demonstrate that we have done something that's needed and it's being used. But the question is where to go from here. And we have had feedback, and I think Sadia talked about it as well. Like we want to include a broader representation of research from more languages and more countries. Religion and development evidence is still very much dominated by Western Christian English perspectives. And so we want to broaden that. We also want to, again, make sure that we do better research communications next time we reach a broader group of people, and that we have more, translation of the document, and translation of the different materials produced from the document, and maybe better ways to engage people in how they can use the document, like workshops that we can create and then implement with different groups that need to use that kind of evidence to think through their strategy or their programming. So there's there's an endless number of ways that I want to change it, and we can do different things with it. And there's also the question just of the content. We could just do an update every 2 years, but I don't think that's that interesting. And it seems that generally people want us to do a different report every 2 years. So the question is, what topics and chapters do we want to engage with in the next State of the Evidence report? Again, how do they link to the learning hubs? Who's going to be involved, etc. And that's still, those are conversations we're having.
Mm. Yes, it sounds really exciting, and hopefully we will be able to see that next publication materialize and expand further in terms of people who will be able to read or listen or watch it. Right, there are different ways of how that report is being distributed. Olivia, I have a couple of lighter questions for you. I personally think they're fun, but they indirectly will help the listeners to understand more about you as well as JLI. A song that a question that I always ask is, if I ask you to come up with a song or a piece of music that best represents, from your perspective, what JLI is about, which song or piece of music would that be and why?
Yes, I had a little time to think about this beforehand because I don't know if anything would have come completely off the top of my head. Yeah. But I went back to a song that I used to listen to so much as a child, which is by Cat Stevens or Yusuf Islam, called Peace Train. And my parents played Cat Stevens all the time when I was growing up. That was just part of the sounds of my childhood.
Yeah.
Obviously, Peace Train is a very ambitious song. I'm not saying that JLI is claiming that it is the responsible organization for solving peace in the world. But why I think it's interesting for JLI to think about is I think that, well, firstly, it's a very passionate song. It's someone calling for, this deeply held value of peace that's, in our hearts as children, as adults, something that we aspire to. And I do think that all the people that work in JLI, we're working in JLI because we're holding our values as part of our professional life. And we are aspirational in what we're trying to do. And we're a small and scrappy organization, still aspirationally trying to push the curve and push for something that sometimes other people, don't believe we really should be pushing for, or think we're pushing too far or too much. And I'm proud of us as an organization for keeping doing that. And of course, just the values that we are working for are connected to that idea of peace in our world. But another thing that I liked is the idea of a train and the invitation to everyone jump on the peace train, because I think of JLI in that invitational way. Like, we are inviting people to join with us on this journey, and join with us as part of this aspirational kind of collaborative space that we're trying to create. So yeah, that's it really. But it wasn't an easy one to come up with, but that's what I got to.
That people consider, my music related question always as the most difficult one. So I think you did a great job, and it's a great song. We have a lot of conversations right at the moment, and maybe it can be divided in two things. One is how can we ensure that JLI can continue to do the work that it needs to do, and so a lot of those questions are related with funding and business model. How do you make our organization more sustainable? The other question is also then what should be the focus for the future of JLI. So what is your opinion about that, the focus?
Yeah, I feel like this is a question that we come back to again and again and again. And now, having been involved with JLI for 10 plus years, we have reflected on that many times over. And you know, sometimes we've even asked the question of, is there a future? Like, should there be a future? You know, initially JLI was intended as maybe a 2 to 3 year project. It wasn't going to be long term. And we do keep coming back to the fact that we do think there is a place for JLI and there isn't an equivalent of JLI, and we have value in that. And I think the future of JLI is that we can push others around us in the religion and development space, particularly, to think more about their regionalization and localization, and we can model that ourselves. And I think that we've been doing that. And I think that there's kind of unfortunately, the continued role for us to keep stating sometimes what now almost feels like the obvious. Because there are still many people in the humanitarian and development world that are need help about how they do their religious engagement. And even if we have done it for many years and advised many different groups, there's still so much, it's still really a nascent area in so many ways, that's growing, and can learn and has so much to learn about how do we do better religious engagement and development. So as kind of like an advisory function based on our knowledge of the evidence and our own research, that function, I think, will continue to exist for a long time. I mean, the sustainability of a small organization, however, remains an issue, and a challenge. And, you know, the things that we get paid to do in terms of advice and research aren't necessarily the things that are supporting sometimes what we want to do, such as the regionalization of the learning hubs, where we put a lot more time and effort and money into working with local researchers on topics that they want to research rather than topics that are defined by other people. And so, yeah, we have a little bit of sometimes that mismatch of, you know, where we would we think there's a need, and where we're able to fund. And I think that JLI is a small organization and will remain a small organization. Like, we're not going to be 100, 200, 1,000 people. Like, we haven't got that scope. And there's not that level of interest in religious engagement. So any small nonprofit is always going to be like slightly scrabbling at the margins in some ways. But I do not have the answer to the sustainability question. And I've been thinking about it for JLI for many years now as well. So yeah, it's a hard one.
Yeah, these conversations always go fast. I do want to ask you, what do you hope that this podcast episode might do for JLI?
Yeah, well, thank you very much for doing the series on JLI. I think it is great to bring JLI to the attention of your audience, so just a wider audience that we haven't maybe reached yet. And it's good for us as well just to have these summaries, another format for people to listen to find out more about JLI. You know, we've probably not done enough in terms of video, audio, etc., in our communication of the research and evidence that we have. So anything that is expanding our reach in that way is good, and also a demonstration and like an experiment for us about what we could do more in this area. So I think that you've talk to a really good group of people. Maybe you'll talk to more as well, and, you know, just keep demonstrating the breadth of people involved in JLI, and that will help, I think, further dig into the reasons why, you know, maybe some of the newer people that are really involved in JLI right now, but have only been involved for maybe, you know, 2 years. I'd be really interested to know more about what JLI means to them, you know, right now, what it's doing for them and their work and their practice or research or whatever they're working on.
Question that we did not address that I should have asked.
Well, that is a great question to ask. Perfect interview. Final question. We didn't really talk. I mean, I talked in an abstract way, but I didn't really talk exactly about this idea of strategic religious engagement that has been big for JLI recently, and I've been particularly working on. So could talk about that a bit more. But I mean, Catherine talked about that a bit, I guess.
Let us piggyback a little bit on that religious engagement. So has our thinking on good practice around religious engagements evolved over the years? And if so, how?
Yes, JLI's thinking, my thinking, JLI's thinking, many people's thinking, or the people who are involved in this area, are thinking on religious engagement and how to do it well has definitely evolved. And that's because we have more evidence. It really is. Like we've just learned more and more over the years. I mean, some things have not changed. Some things, the people researching and writing about this subject in the 90s, the early 2000s, were making the same points. And, they are the same points that tell us religion is being ignored. Why is religion being ignored? This is important. This is a gap. Or religion, when it's not ignored, is being instrumentalized, and it's being instrumentalized to co-opt its assets and uses for development purposes. And some of those things are still very much true, but I do think we've also changed, and we are adding nuance and more experience to all of those points. I have, in fact, written a whole journal article about this that is open access that we can also link for anyone that wants to read it. And, what we're talking about now is just is different. So like that, in the early 2000s, there were a lot of publications on this is what makes a faith-based organization and a typology of an FBO. People were writing about that. Whereas now what we want to talk about is, well, not really FBOs at all. We want to talk about who are all the different types of religious actors that might be involved. How are they involved in different ways? Let's make sure we include, for example, women from religious minorities more. And how do we do that? Let's make sure we work with young people of faith more. And how do we do that? Which faith-based organizations are on the peripheries of engagement, and why are they on the peripheries, and what dynamic has meant that one faith-based organization has become the preferred organization for all development work in an area, whereas 2 or 3 others get ignored all the time. We're talking now more and more about the ways that it's not just a picture of development organizations instrumentalizing religious actors, but the ways that there's been this dance between religious and development actors and instrumentalization of each other over the years. Like people have played games with each other in many ways, and taken advantage of each other at different times and in different ways as well. So I just think that we're less naive. We're a bit smarter. We're not just taking it as an argument to make the case for religion. And in fact, I think that's really an outdated argument. Like if someone approaches me and says, oh, we're having a conference and the conference question is, why does religion matter? To me, I'm not interested, because that is something that we've gone beyond at this point. We're not asking that question of why does religion matter? We're asking the question of the complexity of religion in every place, the positives, the negatives, and everything in between. I'm not trying to prove religion. Like I don't want to have to be this burden of proof of trying to say religion exists. Of course it does. Of course it's influencing everything that you're doing in your work in some way or another. And I think for years we did have this burden of proof. There was like this expectation that we needed to just bring another piece of evidence to the table that would prove religion matters. And I think finally we're able to, well, first of all, just have so much research and evidence now that that's not as much of a question, but also have more confidence to say, that's really not an interesting question. If you think that that is the basic point that needs to be made, then you haven't understood how much else we have to talk about, because we have a lot more to talk about. And it's going to surprise you in all the ways that the religious dynamics of the context you're working in and how it relates to your programs are incredibly complex. So this has become what's known as more and more as this idea of strategic religious engagement. And I think what we've been able to do in JLI over the years is identify what's not strategic. And sometimes we've been part of it. We've been part of what's not strategic, and we've been frustrated by it and disappointed by it. And so part of strategic religious engagement is a call to ourselves to learn from those experiences and help others learn with that learning too. And again, we can also link this. We actually have a brief on strategic religious engagement that identifies 6 different points of unstrategic religious engagement, and basically everything that's not working right now. And a lot of our work across the JLI is now trying to rectify those issues.
Thank you so much, Olivia. I mean, I think this more or less an hour of conversation did much more than tickle the, curiosity of the listeners. I'm 100% sure they will check out the website and the publications. I really encourage them also to reach out to us if they would like to collaborate or would like to know more. I would like to thank you for for today, but also for everything you have done, for JLI and for who you are. So it's it has been great for me being able to work with you more closely last couple of months. So great. Thank you so much.
Thank you
really
very
appreciate
much.
it.
Thank you. Bye.
As we wrap up today's insightful conversation, I hope it has sparked your curiosity and interest in the vital work of the Joint Learning Initiative on Faith and Local Communities, JLI. If today's episode has resonated with you, whether it's the desire to collaborate, contribute, or even offer financial support to further JLI's impactful mission, we'd love to hear more from you. The JLI's journey is one of collaboration, learning, and making a tangible difference in communities through the unique intersection of faith and development. Your involvement could be a significant part of this transformative process, whether you're looking to offer your expertise, resources, or are seeking to understand more about how you can contribute. Your initiative is invaluable. Please feel free to reach out to us. Send an email to maurice@jliflc.com or contact us through our platform. We welcome your thoughts, questions, and proposals for collaboration. I'll personally ensure that your interest is directed to the right people at JLI, helping you connect with a network of individuals and organizations dedicated to creating a better world through faith-informed development. Thank you for joining us on Walk, Talk, Listen, where each conversation brings us closer to understanding and action. Your engagement doesn't just end with listening, it begins here. Let's continue to be part of this remarkable journey together. Thank you. Thank you for listening to Walk, Talk, Listen. please check us out on 100mile.org or follow us on Facebook or Instagram.